Right, so we're on the last study for our learning approach. We've got four approaches in total. I think that's clear till now. And we're on the last study for learning approach. After this, we'll be done with learning approach. Before this, we did Fagin, and then we also did the Q&A for Fagin. Now we're just going to look at Saavedra, and we're going to try and finish it off as much as we can. So, general outline of Saavedra. Number one thing that you need to remember, which is different for Saavedra, is that it's a case study. What's a case study? A case study is when you study a particular case, which is usually just one human being or one family. So ultimately, you have a very small sample for a case study. Okay, so Saavedra and Silverman was actually a case study. Saavedra and Silverman are the name of the psychologists. They were two women who did this study, and the aim of the study, or the whole thing behind the study, was that they were actually studying phobia. They were studying a button phobia. So, if just to clarify what phobia is basically when you're scared of something that provokes anxiety in you. Um, for some reason. Okay, so we can have phobia from water, we can have phobia from heights, we can have a height phobia, water phobia. All these phobias are called something or the other. People are scared of spiders, people are scared of lots of holes. There are just a lot of phobias that you can have, right? So anything that will provoke your anxiety or anything that you are scared of doing, that is basically falling under the definition of phobia. Okay, so these two women or these two psychologists, they wanted to study the button phobia in a kid. Okay, he was a 5-year-old Hispanic American boy, and he had a button phobia. He was scared of buttons, like the shirt buttons. Okay, all sorts of buttons. And they wanted to see why is that, not just why is that, but they wanted to see if there's treatments for that, and they will try to two treatments. So when we look at the treatments for his button phobia, that is where learning approach actually steps in, because his treatments are to do with learning, right? So his what they're basically going to try and do is that they're going to use operant conditioning, which I will explain to you again today. They're going to try and use operant conditioning in order to make sure that the phobia is unlearned, if to see if the phobia can be unlearned, so that can they learn something else which will replace the phobia, essentially that. Does that make sense a little bit, maybe?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Right, okay, so we're just gonna overview all of the things. So number one, we've always got the background. Again, Saavedra and Silverman is about button phobia. This is Silverman because she was Wendy Silverman, and this is Lisette Saavedra. And okay, so they basically were both child psychologists, and picked out this boy from Child Study Center of Anxiety, and he was a boy with button phobia. And then they basically checked his all his symptoms. They checked it against the DSM-5, and yeah, they actually he was eligible for the criteria of button phobia. Um, so this is just the background a little bit, not something that you need to like remember. This is just about the psychologist. This is the psychologist corner. The key terms are all the things that you're going to be learning. So one thing that you're going to be learning is evaluative learning. Another thing that you're going to be learning is phobias. After that, you'll be learning classical conditioning, then discussion, operant conditioning, and fear response. Now all of these things are something that are all part of the procedure. So I'm going to take you within the procedure one by one. Okay, so now these are all the things that are being investigated, right? So all the things that they're looking at. Number one is phobias, right? So the study actually explores. I'm going to read what they're saying and I'm going to explain it, but you know the overview already. So explores the case of a 9-year-old boy with a phobia of buttons. A phobia is an intense fear or anxiety that occurs every time a person comes into contact with a certain object or situation. Common phobias include spiders, flying, height, blood, and injections. While these may be scary for some people, a person with a phobia experiences a level of fear that is much higher. So, generally, yes, everybody's scared of, let's say, injections, or maybe everybody's a little creeped out or scared of spiders as well. But a phobia is when it's like uncontrollable fear. It's like you're really, really, really scared. It gives you a lot of anxiety, that level of danger or that level of scared. Even if the thing is harmless, it can be very dangerous. harmless to you, like for example, if water is completely harmless to you, you shouldn't be that scared of it. But within a phobia, there's this uncontrollable level of fear that you have. And over here, even though buttons don't harm that boy, right? They, what will buttons do? They're literally a tangible non-living object, right? They can't really do anything. But he had this uncontrollable level of fear with buttons. Okay, so there's always a reason as to why. So they said that they wanted to study the button phobia, even though there are other common types of phobia, and that's what they're explaining. Now, one explanation is of the classical conditioning. Now, they're going to use classical conditioning in order to make the boy unlearn the phobia, not learn the phobia, unlearn the phobia. So, basically, what had happened in the study is that this boy wasn't born with this phobia; he developed it over time. What happened is he was in a classroom, and his teacher asked him to pick up a bowl of buttons, and that whole bowl fell down on him. And I think when he was 5 years old, now he's 9 or something when he's doing the study, and that whole button bowl fell on him, and everybody started laughing. Now that experience of his that stayed with him, and because of that particular experience, or because of that, what happened is that he developed this phobia. And now what they're gonna do is Saavedra and Silverman are gonna use classical conditioning in order to see if he can also forget that phobia through a study process, right? So they're saying that if a neutral stimulus is anything that does not cause you fear, is present at the same time as something scary, we may learn to associate the neutral stimulus with the scary stimulus. Now, if I take you back to Fargan study, we looked at this and we understood the concept of neutral and conditioned stimulus. Okay, so neutral stimulus is anything that is not affecting you, but the moment it starts affecting you, it becomes a conditioned stimulus, right? So, for example, the example that we always use is the dog with the saliva. So every single time the person rang the bell, the dog did not care. It was a neutral stimulus, it did not affect him. But if what happened is that right after the bell was rung, he used to get food. So that neutral stimulus of the bell became a conditioned stimulus for him, because every single time the bell rang, he knew that something good is going to happen for him. Hence, that is something that he learned, and that is classical conditioning. Over here as well, what they're basically going to do is that they know that even though the buttons in themselves were not scary, but the experience that he had with the buttons is something that made them scary. So there was the classical conditioning aspect here, where he connected two things. Just because something negative happened with something positive, he thought of that negative thing happening. Right? Makes sense?
Yes, miss.
Right. So once we read the study, we'll understand it better. But general classical conditioning explanation is that when a neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus or a scary stimulus, because of how you associate it with fear, or how you generally associate it. And this is called expectancy learning. Why is it called expectancy learning? Now, when we use the word expectancy, that means that is starting with the word expect, right? So that means that you predict, or you expect, or you forecast for a certain thing to happen. So once what happens is when you start predicting or you start forecasting that, you start expecting that, oh my god, something bad is going to happen, there is a huge chance that yes, something bad will happen. So essentially that is what they're talking about, that is expectancy learning, classical conditioning, where you start expecting something to happen. So there are conditioned stimulus. So I know, like every single time there's let's say I know that every single time someone rings the bell twice, like my doorbell twice, my dad's gonna get mad. Let's just say it's like something that I expect to happen, and that is the response that I will learn as well. And I know that every single time someone rings the bell, I know that Papa is gonna get mad, right? I'm gonna be like, oh my god, Dad's gonna be so mad now. Because why? It has become an expectant response, it has become something that I have learned over time. Now, coming to evaluative learning, expectancy and evaluative learning both come under classical conditioning only, but in different formats. Okay, expectancy learning is when you expect something bad to happen, whereas evaluative learning is when you evaluate it, when you think about it, and you basically that experience of yours, you think about it and then you presume. So I'll explain better when we've read it. So they're saying it themselves, evaluative learning is a special type of classical conditioning. If a neutral stimulus is paired with something that finds find the something that the person finds really disgusting, then the previously disgusting neutral stimulus may provoke now provoke the same negative reaction as the disgusting stimulus. Evaluative learning is not the same as expectancy learning. The person does not anticipate any danger or threat. They just experience an involuntary disgust response due to the strong association that has been made. They now perceive or evaluate the previous neutral stimulus in a negative way but cannot explain why. So basically, the difference between expectancy learning and evaluative learning is that when you talk about expectancy learning, that is when they expect something or they predict something bad to happen, okay, or predict something to happen, good or bad or whatever, right? Evaluative learning is when they combine an experience, so they don't expect that something bad will happen, but they base their whole idea based on experiences. So maybe I will not expect my dad to get mad, but let's say there has been an experience where when you ring three bells there a current comes out or something, right? So I'll be like, okay, yeah, because of that experience I'm actually scared for the person outside that if they ring one more doorbell there's going to be an electric shock for them or something like that, right? So evaluative learning is basically when you evaluate it on the basis of an experience. So let's say once I had some food from, let's say, a burger joint and I got food poisoning. Now every single time I go to that burger joint, I know that there can be an evaluation, like there will be evaluative learning, or that I will base it upon the experience that I've already had. So every single time I'm going to be like, no, no, not this place, because this place gave me food poisoning. Now that is not something I'm expecting, that is something I am basing on experience. That is why it's an evaluative decision. Make sense?
Yes, miss.
Okay, now we've got operant conditioning. Okay, so like we have classical conditioning, similar to that we have operant conditioning. It is also a branch of learning approach. So Saavedra and Silverman used the principles of operant conditioning in their treatment of the boys' button phobia. They used positive reinforcement. So operant conditioning is mostly positive reinforcement. It's also contingency management, but primarily it's positive reinforcement, which means that you basically positively reinforce a certain behavior. Now this is something that we just learned with the elephants as well, that you used to positively reinforce their behavior by giving them a banana. So by giving them a reward, their behavior would be positively reinforced, right? So that is going to come under operant conditioning. So over here as well, every single time the boy used to learn how to deal with buttons, the mom used to give him a reward, and that was basically positive reinforcement, that this behavior was positively reinforced. The boy was made to reinforce this behavior basically. Okay, makes sense.
Yes, yes, miss.
Okay, so just to clarify it better, the last part, uh, every single time he did something positive in his therapy session. So he used to have therapy sessions with his mother as well. Mother was present there, and every time he did something positive or handled something positively or the buttons positively, he would get rewarded for it. And that is why his behavior would be encouraged, and he would be more likely to do it again and again and again because of the reward. Right. So background of the study is diagnosing phobia. So like I was telling you previously, that they picked him out from a child health anxiety center, and they diagnosed him. They checked his tallied his symptom from DSM-5, and they saw that if he actually falls into the category of button phobia, and he did, right? So that's what they're talking about, that diagnosing phobias is there's a whole manual for it, okay? And manuals are used to decide whether a person's symptoms are severe enough to require a diagnosis. So you can't always say, um, if a person is, let's say, scared of lizard, you can't always say it's a phobia. Maybe they're just generally scared. So in order to have a phobia, you need to diagnose yourself, and that is something that the psychologists have to do for you. So these contain detailed criteria that must be met, and including the duration and the type of symptom. Now what that means is, when they're diagnosing a certain person for a phobia, they have a whole manual. They have pointers that need to match. All of the pointers need to match, and within these pointers they're saying that duration is one very important aspect, and with that the type of symptoms is also a very important aspect, right? So duration as in for how long has the person been feeling this way. Similarly, type of symptoms as in how, to what extent, like what is like how are they, what their symptoms are, all of the types of symptoms, in order to basically see and diagnose them with schizophrenia, oh sorry, with phobia, to see if they're actually going to fall under the category of that particular phobia. So Saavedra and Silverman, they refer to a DSM. Okay, I told you this already. It's a book, and over here there was a list of symptoms that had to be ticked. Okay, and when they did that, they basically found out that yes, okay, this kid does have button phobia. So the boy in this study was diagnosed using a semi-structured interview schedule called the anxiety disorders interview schedule for DSM-4 child parent versions, which was based on the DSM-4 criteria. So he was basically diagnosed through a semi-structured interview. That's what they're trying to tell you, that the psychologist took a semi-structured interview in order to diagnose him, right? Then you have disgust. So disgust is an important human emotion that helps us to survive. Just give me a second. Sorry. Right, so disgust is an important human emotion that helps us to survive. The negative feelings that are produced, including feeling sick, nauseous, ensures that we avoid certain things that could make us ill. For example, contaminated blood or moldy food. So basically, disgust is a very general word, and it's a general human emotion that disgusts us, right? That makes us nauseous or that makes us want to puke, right? And they are going to connect that particular emotion with the phobia here, but before that you just need to understand that that is not a response, but that's a feeling. So disgust is the feeling aspect of it, not the respondent aspect of it. So what they're going to do is that through evaluative learning, which we just looked at, which was positive reinforcement, what they're going to do is that they are going to make sure that the person is also not disgusted with the buttons, okay? That they also are okay with touching the buttons and everything. So disgust was another emotion that they're going to deal uh, with alongside fear. They're talking about previous research. So before this, they did do a research on childhood phobias. It was Hepburn and Page. They studied 47 adults with blood injury phobias and found that the targeting disgust was helpful in reducing certain symptoms. So what they're saying is that if you can reduce disgust, you can basically reduce the symptoms. And how can you reduce the disgust? By through evaluative learning or through operant conditioning. Make sense?
Yes, Miss. Miss,
Mm.
uh, is is that mean phobia and fear is a different thing?
I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Are you asking if phobia and disgust are different things?
Phobia and fear. Is,
Yeah, so no, to some extent. So basically, anything that causes fear is slightly different from you being diagnosed with a phobia. So you could have, let's say, you have a fear of water, but that doesn't mean you have a phobia of water. Why not? Because when you talk about fear is that you're genuinely scared. But when you talk about phobia, is that you start feeling anxious. You are uncontrollably scared. Like you can't control yourself. Like you start crying, you start getting sick. That will be a phobia. So fear and phobia are interrelated, of course, but they're not the same thing, because fear is something that you can generally have in your life, right? But phobia is something that you need to be diagnosed for, that you need to be diagnosed for through the DSM-5, which they were just explaining. Make sense?
yes, Miss.
Okay, and then they've explained us evaluative learning. So let's say there's ants running on your arm, which causes disgust. Okay, so there's ant on this person's arm, and this causes them disgust. Now these are unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. Now flower is a neutral stimulus, but what happens is that they know, okay, flowers, if you touch a flower, ants going to come on your hands, and then that is going to cause a disgust. Now, but what happens is that flower, even though it's a neutral stimulus, it becomes a conditioned stimulus. How? Because every single time you look at a flower, now you just think of the ants coming to your hands, and thus you're scared of it. Make sense?
Yes, Miss.
Okay, great. um okay, so just I'll explain the first part. Again, it's no explanation. Again, they're talking about the same thing, that the study they're telling us the introduction, which I already told you. And they're talking about how they're going to use exposure and disgusting imagery exposure to treat the phobia, which we will talk about. So that'll be clearer to you. But they're just give me 1 second. I had to drink water. Hi, yeah, sorry. Right. So they're saying that we are going to treat the phobia. We're going to look at this case study as a treatment for phobias, and how are we going to do that? Through imagery exposure. They're going to use two treatments actually. One is going to do with classical conditioning. The other one's going to be through operant conditioning. And the one with classical conditioning is basically what they're going to do through imagery exposure. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, classification systems are not important. Just this part about, yeah. Okay, so planning. Right, planning a laboratory experiment. This is research method. So just read this part, the last paragraph. Once you're done with this, just read these boxes. This is something I've already done with you. This is just for your revision. So it's better if you keep revising with me rather than doing it all over again yourself. So let's just start. Just read from this. Once you're done reading this, let ask me to switch the page.
All right. Miss, I'm done with this page. Miss, I'm done. Miss, I'm done.
Okay, so you understand all of this. This is just general procedure of laboratory experiments and strengths and weaknesses. Do you get it?
Yes, Miss.
Okay, so now we're going to start the study itself. Okay. Right, okay. So, aim of the study is that they wanted to highlight the role of evaluative learning and discuss in the development of treatment of children's phobia. So, they wanted to see if we can use evaluative learning to target disgust and to treat disgust, and in order treat the phobia, right? So, it can be used evaluative learning in treating children's phobia. That's number one. And the second is test the efficacy, which is the effectiveness of imagery exposure as part of an exposure-based cognitive behavioral treatment. So the first thing they wanted to check if they can use evaluative learning to treat phobias. The second thing they want to check that if they can test the effectiveness of imagery exposure as well. So can they actually look at imagery exposure as well, or they actually look at can they see if imagery exposure is going to help treat the phobia as well. Okay, so that's two things that they want to see: evaluative learning and imagery exposure, if they can help with the phobia treatment. Again, I've told you this, it was a case study. It was in depth, detailed case study. Both qualitative and quantitative data were collected. There was structured interviews, there was observations, and there was a psychometric scale to measure subjective distress. So these are all the methods. So in a case study, you can use different things. You can use observations, experiments, correlations within a case study only. Okay, so they can use all of these methods in just one case study, and that's what they did. They used three methods. They used structured interviews, they used observations, and they use a psychometric scale. Psychometric scale is a scale that they are going to just create for disgust. Okay, so that's something that you'll have to remember, all the things that they use. Study was longitudinal. What does longitudinal mean? That it was done over a long time period. It wasn't that, oh my god, 2 week study and it's 2 weeks are over, so it's over. It wasn't like that. It was a longitudinal study. It kept going on. Okay, until for a long time period, for years actually. So the study was longitudinal because his behavior was studied before treatment, after treatment, and then there were follow-up sessions for 6 months, then 12 months. So basically, he was studied before his treatment, then he was studied throughout his treatment, and after his treatment was over, there were also follow-ups with his treatment, like to see if he's actually doing better or not. Measured variables. So the boy's approach and avoidance behaviors were carefully observed and recorded during therapy sessions. This basically means all the behaviors that he was showing, they had to rate them and have them in the observational list, which included touching buttons, holding buttons, manipulating buttons, all of those things. And through this, they made a feelings thermometer. Now, feelings thermometer was basically, there was this whole chart of all the types of buttons there are, and on a 9 point scale, you had to rate how disgusting they feel to you. So if it said big plastic buttons, so from 0 to 9, how disgusting are they? So the boy had to mark them. So let's say for plastic buttons, let's say it's 5. Even though for plastic buttons it's 9, but let's say for plastic buttons he rates 5. For wooden buttons, let's say he rates 3. um, all of those things. So that was a Phoenix thermometer that they actually created during the study. um, and yeah, then we have the sample. Okay, sample was a 9-year-old Hispanic American boy. He was from Florida. He was brought from child anxiety and phobia program from Florida University. His phobia started when he was 5 years old, and he had been living with his phobia for the last 4 years. Clear till here?
Yes, yes.
Okay, just one second. Yeah, so I'm not going to do the treatment over here because otherwise it's going to be an informational dump. I'm going to do the initial assessment and diagnosis with you right now. Assessment and diagnosis is basically how was he diagnosed, how did they find out that this was the guy, or this needs to be he needs to be the part of our study, or he needs to be part of our research, is through his initial assessment and diagnosis. So boy and mother actually met the psychologist, and they had an interview. Interview allowed the researchers to confirm that the boy had met the criteria of the specific phobia. So they checked in that interview if he has that specific phobia that they wanted to research. They also asked the boy and the mother about stressful events. So they asked that what caused it, or tell us about all the stressful events that you've gone through or he has gone through, whether it can be traumatic events or physical abuse, all of those things, right? So that they can treat him better. And they also checked if he has any other disorders. So was it just this phobia, or does he have anxiety, OCD, any symptoms, other symptoms? So but he did not, he only had this phobia, right? So this is clear till here.
Yes, yes.
Okay. um right, so we've got the procedure left, we've got the results left, and then we're done. It's a very short study, and yeah, it's like pretty simple. So we should essentially be done by the next class. I know it was a short class, but yeah, I mean, we can't just rush into the whole thing all at once. So yeah, you're done for today, and I'll see you Thursday, and we'll complete it and even do past paper questions on Thursday then.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.